Hi, Meg. Welcome.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm just so delighted to have you. Thank you. I hope you like the Amherstburg Cannon behind me.
Yes, it's very appropriate. I like the house, the barracks, you've got, yeah, everything in there.
Is the house at the barracks?
So on I guess it's my left. I see the barracks peeking out behind the cannon.
Oh,
And
okay.
then on the right is what we call Huff House. And that was actually built when the fort was the Malden Lunatic Asylum.
Oh,
Yeah,
interesting.
it was the laundry.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. Why don't you introduce yourself?
So my name is Meg Reiner, and I work at the Marsh Historical Collection in Amherstburg, and my title here is Collections Coordinator.
Wonderful. I'm so glad you could join us. Now, you weren't there when I came through the first time in 2014.
Right, yeah.
I came through and my mom and we had just been to Niagara Falls and Mohawk Village and we're coming back through, went through Thamesville, Ontario, and then knew that William Caldwell had founded Amherstburg. So we stopped and we really didn't know much about it. We were going to drive around. We found the senior Caldwell's church,
Mhm.
and I didn't know the Chamber of Commerce was closed. So
Mm.
I said to my mom, why don't we go sit in this coffee shop and we'll talk to some of the old timers and see if where else we could get some information. And so sure enough, the waitress came by, poured our coffee, and we said, where else can we find some history on Amherstburg? She said, well, have you been to the Marsh Genealogical Center? I don't think you're called that anymore.
Yeah,
And
we still use that sometimes, yeah.
yeah, okay. So it was down the street, and we walked down there and met two ladies and asked her. I walked in and I said, "Do you have any information on Billy Caldwell?" It would have been around, 1780 to 17, maybe to 1800. And she pulled out this huge file of stuff. It was the first time we'd seen any information about Caldwell, the family tree, and everything. So what a resource you have there.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm guessing when you visited, you were dealing with Eleanor Warren, who was our former president, and then Jennifer McLeod. She
Yeah.
was basically me at that time. Yeah, so we're lucky. Like you said, one of our main purposes here is as a genealogy society. So we have a ton of files on local families, and of course, the Caldwells are one of those families. So luckily, we have a large file that's been compiled over time, starting with the Marsh family would have compiled the local history materials, and then it's been added to by our research and then other local people who are interested in the family too.
Wonderful. Well, it's just so nice to know. And in those files, I know you showed me, because then I came back through a second time, and that's when I met with you. And you
Mhm.
had some letters that Billy Caldwell had written. So I have those. You have the family tree. And when you do genealogy, did you do it for the baby family for William Caldwell's second wife?
Yeah, so there would be a little bit about her as well, because there's connections to the Catholic Church here, so that we would have records for Saint John the Baptist, connecting to her family and her ties there. And yeah, I mean, I know the family has a lot of connections to Sandwich, but also Amherstburg as well, so we'd have a file on them too.
Okay, so for people that aren't familiar with the area, I grew up in Detroit, and across the Detroit River on the Canadian side is Windsor, and then
Mhm.
Amherstburg is south of Windsor. How far?
You know what? I couldn't tell you. It's about a half an hour drive.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. On our side, there'd be about 30 miles. So,
Yeah.
and it's right along the Detroit River, and
Yes.
then the south end empties into, is it Lake here?
Lake Erie.
Erie, yeah. And then the north end goes toward Lake
St.
St. Clair?
Clair.
St.
Yes.
Clair, yeah.
Yeah.
And it was a pivotal area in the 1800s, War 1812, just a lot going on.
Hmm.
And while I'm thinking of it, have you read that book about Billy Caldwell and Tecumseh? I think it's called The Panther.
No, I haven't.
Oh, I'll send it to you. I have
Okay.
a copy and I'll send you, I bought it off eBay. but it's it's a fictional story, but it's about Billy Caldwell because they used to go back and forth from Amherstburg to Detroit quite often,
Mhm.
back and forth. I actually wonder how they would get across. Probably a wood ferry, huh?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean,
And
bring up Detroit, there's so many connections, right? Between,
oh, so many connections. And the stories about Caldwell and Tecumseh going to school over there and coming back in a snowstorm.
okay.
And just how Caldwell was, who was younger than Tecumseh, would sit in the front of the fireplace and listen to the stories between Tecumseh and the father, William Caldwell.
Okay, yeah, that'd be great. I'd love to read
Yeah,
it.
I think you would. I'll see if I can find another copy on eBay too. But yeah, the connection between Detroit and the Canadian side was before the War of 1812. There was a lot of movement back and forth.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this area was called South Detroit at one point, or known as that.
Really?
But when the British established the fort here in 1796, um, that was when Detroit was being evacuated, and many former residents of Detroit occupied the lots here that were established on the garrison grounds of the fort. So a lot of our first residents were from Detroit.
So Billy Caldwell's father was William Caldwell. So I just call him William the Senior Caldwell. And when did he arrive in Amherstburg?
So he was granted land along with other officers of the British Indian Department in 1783. They were gifted land by the indigenous peoples of Detroit area.
Right.
So that would have been where Amherstburg is now. South of that is what we, for a time, was Malden Township. So the land that William Caldwell was granted was primarily in Malden Township, and it was quite a bit of land there.
Yeah, I
Along,
saw in your files you have the survey.
yeah, yeah. So
Mhm.
that would have been right along the river, but then also inland quite a bit as well, around Big Creek, that marsh area. So 1783 is when he would have come here.
I didn't know it was that early because Billy Caldwell, being born in 1780, would have been only 3 years old when his
Mhm.
father got that land. I thought it was a little bit later, but that makes sense why he was so entrenched there by the time Billy was three.
Right. Yeah. Um, yeah, I mean, so there's a lot of things here. That was called the Caldwell Grant, and that name has been used kind of over and over again by local businesses. There was a restaurant here called Caldwell's Grant that was really well known for a time, but yeah, so that part of our history really lives on. Yeah.
So before that, and I know we didn't talk about this at all, but do you have any history about William Caldwell before he arrived in Amherstburg?
Me personally, that's not something that I've really considered
Yeah.
a whole lot into, but I mean, I do know that he was imprisoned in Pennsylvania,
Mhm.
being a loyalist, and then he ended up escaping and coming to Fort Niagara. And I believe that's where he first became involved with the Butler's Rangers and
Hmm.
came to Detroit with the Butler's Rangers. Um, so that's, I guess, a bit of the history, a very brief summary, but that's
Yeah.
really the extent of what I know about his time before.
Well, I've been doing a little bit more research on the father because I just didn't know much about it. And I think he came with a brother through Virginia and then came up to Pennsylvania. So, but I need to clarify that. Um, while we're talking about the grant and that the indigenous people gave him the land, what tribes, and I'm not familiar on the Canadian side,
Mhm.
what tribes were there? Wyandotte, maybe?
Yeah, so I believe it's specifically says the indigenous, I don't know if it says indigenous nations of Detroit, but that would have been referring to the Three Fires Confederacy,
Oh,
I believe at the time. So Potawatomi, Ojibwe, Odawa, and then I believe that would have at that time included the Wyandotte as well
yeah, okay.
on that specific land transfer, I mean.
I remember growing up in Detroit, we had a Wyandotte area, so that's why I
Mhm.
knew the name. But we really, Detroit's a lot older than Chicago, where I live. And we didn't have a lot of Native American history in Detroit when I grew up.
Okay.
Of course, that was the era too. We didn't really talk much about it. But even when I reflect back, there wasn't much kept, in
Hmm.
terms. Most everything's been plowed over.
So what we would have at the Marsh, because most of our files, at the heart of what we collect is the Amherstburg Echo, because that's what the Marsh family owned and operated for a long time.
Is that a newspaper?
The news, yeah, so the
Uh,
Amherstburg Echo newspaper, which started in 1874. So a lot of our information is a later period than what you're looking at, but the Wyandotte were still here at that time. And Anderton Township, which is the area just north of Amherstburg proper, between Amherstburg and Windsor, that was the Anderton Reserve, established for the Wyandotte. So we do still have quite a bit of information about the Wyandotte in our files because we have a ton of genealogy with the church records here. We have property information, maps showing who lived where, and newspaper articles talking about the people in that community. So that is one thing that we're lucky to have a lot of information on, but we are lacking, the pre-settler period information just because we don't have those resources here. Yeah.
sure. And that I've said this for 30 years that Canadian historical information has been better than the US. And I
Mm.
think maybe my theory is that perhaps because the British were aligned with the indigenous community, that
Okay.
there was this kind of record in place where on our side, on the American side, we were erasing them.
Mm. Yeah, when we're looking for, and I'm talking Amherstburg specifically, when we're looking for that early records, we would go to Library and Archives Canada.
Yeah.
That's where we would find those records, and Parks Canada as well with Fort Malden would have a lot more information about the earlier history.
So let's talk about Fort Malden. I didn't go in there yet, and so next time I go back, I want to go in. I walked around the area and captured some pictures, and but when you do this kind of research, you have to stay so myopic on what you're doing, and it was
Mhm.
just Billy Caldwell. I can't get into everything
Yeah.
else that was there, but can you talk a little bit about Fort Malden and its relevance to the Detroit River, Detroit, that area?
Yeah, I can talk a little bit. Again, the Marsh collection, that's not our focus because
Mm-hmm.
Fort Malden's here. We kind of leave that part of our history to those experts.
Mm-hmm.
But just generally, the British established their fort here in 1796, and because of that, the town was developed here. So uh, it was sort of gradual. It wasn't an immediate town settlement that was established, but there were subsequent streets laid out on the garrison grounds. And, you had traders and merchants coming from Detroit to settle here, but then you also had people coming here to help support the fort. We had the provincial or the Navy Yard here. And
Mm-hmm.
so we needed shipbuilders, carpenters, blacksmiths. So that brought people to settle here. And then because of that, we were able to be a pretty prominent port from the beginning. So the fact that that Fort Malden originally was Fort Amherstburg was established here, that is really what led to the development of Amherstburg as a town.
So was that after Caldwell got his land or
Yes, this is
before?
after.
It was after. Okay. So he must have been involved with that.
Yeah, so this would have been, so he received his land 1783. He did
Hmm.
have, there was a lot of back and forth with the government because they felt that the land should have gone through the crown and not gifted directly from the indigenous people. So he was sort of fighting to prove that the land was his for his whole life. But that was 1783, and then the British fort was established 1796. And then you can sort of, trace a lot of the evolution of the town with what was going on at the fort. So by 1859, the fort's no longer needed as a military base for the area. And so buildings start to be repurposed. And that's when you see that one building behind you, when the provincial lunatic asylum takes over the fort, then you have the buildings repurposed, you have more residential development. Um, and then later on, the buildings are repurposed again for residences. So yeah, so what was happening at the fort over time sort of reflects what was happening in the town of Amherstburg.
The town is so cute. The small scale buildings, the main street, right along the edge of the Detroit River is just beautiful.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, we actually just last week finally had a heritage conservation district approved.
Oh,
Um,
congratulations.
Thank you. Well, I wasn't directly involved. That goes to Adam Coates, the Heritage Planner, and the Heritage Committee. They got that finally established. That was a long, long, long time coming.
I bet.
Um, so hopefully we'll, be able to maintain that character because we have lost a lot of really beautiful buildings. And there's a lot of other buildings like, we have Park House Museum, which
Yes.
did you have a chance to visit that
I
one?
didn't go in it, but I made a list of everything I want to get back to.
Yeah, so that's a structure with loyalist connections. It's the earliest building in Amherstburg, but it was floated here from River Rouge. So that's a direct,
Is it the
right?
white one? The white
Yes,
wood? Yeah.
white clapboard
Yes.
building.
It's the oldest one. It has a sign, the oldest one, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep, it was floated here by loyalists who ended up establishing in Amherstburg. It was here by 1798. So we have buildings that go right back to, the establishment of the town. A lot of them might be hidden by modern materials, but they're still here. So hopefully that district will help with that.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And then Sandwich is just north, and the Ambassador Bridge is over top of Sandwich, right?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, I drove
And
through there.
we have a road called Sandwich in Amherstburg that it would be Front Road right along the river, and that leads all the way to Old Sandwich. So that's why it's called Sandwich, the road to Sandwich.
I have another question about Caldwell's first wife, Rising Sun. And, I know we didn't talk about this ahead of time, but do you have any records what happened to her? I tried to trace what happened to her after. So the father comes and takes Billy Caldwell when he
Hmm.
was, I don't know, 7, 8, or 9, takes him down to Amherstburg away from Mohawk Village where his mom was. And then I tried to trace what happened to her after. Do you have any information on her?
You know what? I took a look right before this as well, just to check, and we have no information about her at all.
Yeah. I found one source saying that she died in 1812, and so I wondered,
Hmm.
if that was in relation to the war, but I don't know. It's been tough for me to research on the Native American side, and a lot because of the naming nomenclature. She was named after her father with the same name.
Right, right.
What about what you know about the Caldwell and Amherstburg, what he accomplished? I know he built a church there. I went and saw his church.
Mhm.
Was he buried in Amherstburg?
Yeah, he is buried at actually not the church that he's associated
Yeah,
with.
I couldn't find him.
Building. Yeah, so that's Christ Anglican Church,
Uh-huh.
where he has a pew to commemorate him. But he's actually buried at St. John the Baptist Church Cemetery, which is on Bather Street. That's not where the church is today. That's where the original church stood. So
Oh.
he's buried there. And yeah, I believe there is a marker there for him as well.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Is he buried with his wife, the baby, Suzanne Baby?
Yes, I believe. I don't know if they're together. I'd have to look into that. I know there was a few articles about when they were looking at that cemetery. There's been because there's a school there now,
Mm-hmm.
original St. John the Baptist Cemetery, so they had to do an archaeological dig in that. But yeah, I can't say for sure if they're together or not.
Can you give me kind of a history timeline? So Amherstburg is founded, Caldwell's there, he's with baby, they die off. How's the town evolve from, the early 1800s forward?
Okay, so yeah, so if we're starting with, the fort being established, 1796, then initially we have this military period. Everything's, surrounding the fort, the King's Navy Yard. But you're also seeing a lot of activity on the river, shipbuilding, um, and just a busy port in general. And then you move ahead, you still have a little bit of the military activity during the Upper Canada Rebellion, 1837, 1838. By 1850s, there is the pensioner scheme happens then when retired British soldiers are brought over from primarily Ireland to take over for the regulars at the fort because there was a lot of desertion going on. So this was supposed to be a solution to that. So you see a wave of immigration happening there. And pensioners' cottages were built in an area of the town, and a lot of those still stand here today. They were just little one-room cottages. One of those is actually at Park House Museum. If you do go there, you can see it.
Yeah, yeah, adorable.
Yeah, yeah, it is. It's hard to imagine a whole family living in there,
Yeah.
but it did. So then, end of 1859, that's when the fort is no longer a military base. So then you see the Provincial Lunatic Asylum, which is what it's called. I don't love that term, but that was what it was called. And that actually provided quite a bit of employment for the town. A lot of people worked there throughout the 1860s. 1872, we see the railway finally come this way. So that provides that really helps with the lumber industry, for example. So you see some population growth there with the railroad
Did that
coming.
rail go over to the United States?
There was a ferry for
Oh,
freight that went from just above town in Anderton Township.
okay.
Um, then we see sort of the 20th century is really a lot of industrial growth. There's a company called Brunner Mond that came and it was established here on the Detroit River, just north of town in Anderton, 1917, 1918. And that was the biggest economic driver for the town. They built a lot of housing. It brought a ton of people here for work. And then you saw more industries follow after that. So yeah, I'd say the 20th century, you just saw like a lot of growth, and that was relating to the industry that was establishing here.
Yeah, I'm thinking it was pretty similar on the Detroit side too, with the auto industry growing, early 1900s.
Right. We
Yeah.
did actually try, we had two attempts at being an auto manufacturing town, and cars were produced, but then in both cases it went bankrupt. So we almost did it, but no success there.
There's always been a close relationship between Detroit and Windsor and this area around because of just commerce. I know that the auto industry is still connected and lumber and energy, of course.
Absolutely. I'm thinking of a couple of different examples. One, during Prohibition with the rum running, you had, there's Amherstburg really thrived at that time during Prohibition because there would be cars loaded up and driven over the river when it was frozen en route to Cuba. But really, they were just heading right over to Detroit. And then when you had the Ambassador Bridge built, then we saw a ton of cottages being built over here on the south end of town, areas like Amherst Point. And there
Mhm.
was a ton of people from the States coming over during the summers. Amherstburg was really promoted as a summer resort. And a lot of those cottages are still there. So those are a couple of examples of times when you could see a lot of back and forth. Yeah.
My family, one line comes from Paris, Ontario, another one from Brantford area,
Mhm.
and we went to Detroit. The river froze over. This was my great grandfather. The river froze over, and they said all the kids put as many clothes on as you can, and they walked over the river, and that's how we got to Detroit.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, my grandfather later wanted to go to Russia and he had to, drum up a passport and figure out how to get citizenship. So we came through Canada, but they And I know he had a summer house up in Kamlaki. I don't know if I'm saying it right. It's north on the north side on
Okay.
Lake St. Clair.
Okay.
So yeah, big connection.
And
So
then to Pablo too.
oh yeah, we went to
Yeah.
Bablo all the time as kids.
Pablo, Canadian land, but the Pablo company was American.
Yeah.
So there you have that too. Yeah.
Well, and it was really interesting how doing a lot of the research that Caldwell, the father, William
Mhm.
Caldwell, and then Billy Caldwell, and then a couple of the brothers,
Mhm.
Thomas Caldwell, and I forget the other one's name, but they would go over to Fort Wayne
Mhm.
and go back and forth. And there was that kind of pre 18, probably even before 19 or 19, 1776, there was even more of that fur trading
Mhm.
camaraderie.
Right.
Talk to me about your genealogical center and the Marsh family, and let's let people know about that resource.
Sure. So the Marsh family, I did mention briefly that they owned and operated the newspaper here, the Amherstburg Echo, for over 80 years.
Mm.
And they themselves had a real interest in local history, so they started a collection. And then they established the Marsh Collection Society itself in 1983, but they didn't want to actually have a facility opened until after their deaths. So that didn't happen until 1994. That's when we opened.
Hmm.
So we started with, their collection, which was already quite large, a lot of
Yeah.
books and just relevant materials. And since then, we've been actively collecting, doing research ourselves. So a lot of what people come in for is the genealogy. They want to learn about local families. But then we also just collect anything to do with the history of the area. So like I said, a lot of it is 1874 and onward, just because that's the Amherstburg Echo is what we rely on. But we do have earlier resources as well, and pretty much if it's a topic to do with Amherstburg, Anderton, or Malden, we'll likely have a file on it, and anyone's welcome to come in and do some research. It's free admission. We try to do local exhibits so that people have something to look at when they come in. We do small local history publications, and we'll do walking tours and presentations, that sort of thing as well.
Oh, it was so wonderful. And I know I'm sure you're digitizing things, but when I went there in 2014, all the information you had, nobody had ever seen before.
Right, right.
It
Yeah,
was everything was just new information.
yeah, all hard copy stuff. I mean, digitizing is one of the main things we do right now. Scanners constantly going just because it helps with access, Even I know
Yeah.
I had to send some scans to you because you
Yeah.
can't get here right away. So it is nice to have the digital version, but I like hard copies as well. So we're not getting rid of those, that's for sure.
Now, the Billy Caldwell, I'm thinking about the letters that you sent me that he wrote in his own words.
Yeah.
They were pretty sophisticated.
Right. So that I was taking a look to see where, because those were the transcripts that we had. Um,
Hmm.
and I'm curious, the original letters likely at Library and Archives Canada. I don't know if you ever tracked that down or not.
No, I never saw original letters. I know
Yeah.
some exist, and I thought they were in the United States, but it makes more sense that they'd be in Canada.
Yeah, I'd wonder with Library and Archives Canada has the British Indian Department or British
Yeah.
Indian Department records. So I wonder if that's where we were able to get a transcript. But yeah, it's nice to have a record in his own writing, to get an idea of his thoughts on different
I
matters.
and I use a quote from one of the letters
Okay.
that talks about, I don't remember the beginning of it, but it talks about if people only knew, this would just sound ridiculous what he had been through.
Right.
And
Mhm.
just his sophistication with his language and his sentence structure and his grammar, I didn't expect that. I mean, of course, it was a little bit more formal language than we speak now, but
Mhm.
it gives you a little bit of an insight to his personality.
Right. Yeah, for sure. I was kind of looking at them too before we were going to talk
Do you have
today.
one there you can read an
I do,
excerpt?
yeah, if you want me to read,
Yeah.
trying to see an appropriate part to read. Let's see. um, this part. He says, in reply to your candid letter, which has given me great satisfaction, wherein you mention that I was a serviceable man in His Majesty's service at the commencement of the late war. I was 500 miles from home then, where a very high salary was offered to me to remain in the Indian country to keep the Indians neutral. I was also to be indulged to trade in the Indiana Territory. No one was to interrupt me in any manner whatever. But I had too great a share of true principle, not expecting any reward from Great Britain for my services. When I did join the army at Amherstburg, it was to support what I had said to the Indians repeatedly long before the war, which it was promised to all natives by the English government through the late illustrious Brock, General Brock. In fact, every general that had the command of the army previous to Sir Gordon Drummond had always behaved in this manner to the Indians, which encouraged them to exert themselves as far as they had it in their power. Yeah, I thought that was interesting, an interesting perspective there.
He had a kindness toward Indians.
Absolutely. And this is supposed to be circa 1816.
So
So
he had
just,
already been to Chicago once and back. And then this is the time period he was with his father trying to, you know, uh, have a relationship with his father.
mhm. Yeah. And the other items from our file was I wanted to see, I wasn't sure in William Caldwell's will, we have his father's will. And,
Hmm.
there was a couple of accounts that said he had divided equally his property among his children. So I wanted to see what Billy received. Uh,
Nothing.
well, it says one lot of land in Harwich,
Harwich.
which
Where's
is
that?
that's in Chatham, Kent. Um,
Really?
yeah, so everyone else it was land here, and then it says to my son Billy Caldwell, late agent of Indian Affairs, one lot of land in Harwich in the Western District. So yeah, I thought that was interesting that it was outside of this area.
So I was in Chatham, Kent last summer for a film festival. They showed the
Okay.
Billy Caldwell film, and my grandmother was from Chatham.
Oh, really, eh?
Yeah.
Okay.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Very interesting. So, I did this other podcast with a pretty notable historian and author of Chicago, Ann Durkin Keating, and she was asking me about Billy Caldwell, and we were talking about a specific property, and I was sharing with her that I always felt like Billy Caldwell was a little bit removed. So wherever people were living, he would kind of live a little bit more on the outskirts. And you talking about this, all the brothers and siblings were in Amherstburg in the city proper, and here Billy Caldwell again is a little bit on the outskirts.
Right. Yes, and just in our files in general, and I know this is because a lot of his um, siblings ended up staying in Amherstburg and he didn't. So that's
Mhm.
probably why we have a lot more information about them. But still, it's easier to find information about the others here than it is about Billy.
Of course. And
Mhm.
I found that all the way through. And
Right.
eventually you just have to try to infer, by reading things. And interestingly, I found some information in Missouri when they lived in Missouri for just a short time. A farmer there left some detailed notes about him and what they thought about him. So
Oh,
you just
wow.
take these pieces and put them together. There are some Draper papers in Wisconsin at the Wisconsin Historical Society. You might be interested in reading those because they involve Billy Caldwell and talk a little bit. They're not first person, but they're pretty close within, I think 20 or 30 years. So
Okay.
pretty accurate.
Yeah.
What else? What else do you think about the Caldwell family? Are there any descendants still you're in communication with at all?
Um, Not directly, no, but there's constantly people coming in to learn about them, right?
Really?
You hear about the Caldwell grant. That's something that comes up a lot. So then people are curious, and there's a lot of research, especially surrounding the land ownership, I find. People want to know more about that since he did well, William owned such a large part of Malden Township, and you see that on maps, right? So there's quite a bit of people, even if they're not related, that are just coming in to learn more about Caldwell. Um, yeah, when I hear the name William Caldwell, it seems to be positive. All of the accounts that I see, of his time here. Of course, his associations with Christ Church, he's well commemorated there. Um, so yeah, I'd say, and like I said, there's businesses that have been named after the Caldwells here. So yeah, I mean that name is still very much present in this town, even though I don't know anyone with the surname Caldwell here
Right. On
present.
the mother's side, I have met descendants of Rising Sun.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Wow.
they're in the Walpole Island area.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, well, they're actually all around Canada, but yeah, he has hundreds of descendants.
Hmm. Yeah, I'm sure there are here, but that I haven't met,
Right.
directly.
It's just fascinating. What else do you have coming up for Marsh? What are some of the things you are looking forward to?
Actually, we're participating in the art crawl, Amherstburg Art Crawl. It's a new event they're doing here. So that's a couple weekends from now, July 18th to 20th.
Wonderful.
So we will have on display early Amherstburg photographers, their works. Um, there's three in particular that took a lot of photos here. Two were sort of portrait photographers, but one took a lot of candid photography here in the 1890s. So it gives us a really good picture of what the town was like. So we'll have their works on display that weekend.
Wonderful.
Yeah, that'll be fun. And then our big project is an exhibit about Brunner Mond, that major industry that I was talking about, because it had such an impact on the town. Pretty much everyone knows. It's kind of like Boblo. You either worked there yourself or you know
Yeah,
somebody that worked there. So that's going to be our major exhibit that we're looking at having displayed in the new year.
that's wonderful. The
Yeah.
the name Amherstburg, is that taken from England, from Amherst? And
This is kind of a touchy subject, but where the name comes from Lord Amherst, who's doesn't have a very pretty history, we'll say. So that is who we're named after, but not necessarily something we're proud of, that's for sure.
well, you know what? I look at these opportunities for people to learn and to educate themselves.
Hmm.
I mean, we have the same thing here with some names of some towns, and it's just it gives people an opportunity to evolve and learn.
Yeah, for sure. I don't think, changing the name helps. I think you need to acknowledge that, things that he did weren't right. But this is the name we've been given. So,
Well, definitely worth visiting. I encourage people to reach out to you, Meg. And honest to gosh, I couldn't have done it without meeting you folks. And you were really the first verification of some facts in Canada that I found. I started out at Niagara Falls at um, just outside there in Mohawk Village and worked my way down and really couldn't find anything about Billy Caldwell, let alone the Caldwell name. And then we got to Amherst and Amherstburg, and I think I just probably cried in there. I
oh,
couldn't believe
really?
the
Yeah,
file. She brought
exciting.
out this file, it probably was a couple inches thick, and I
Mhm.
just couldn't believe it. Finally, some verification. And, this is before the internet. It was in
Right,
24, no. No, it wasn't before the internet. I started researching before the internet,
right.
1993. But this was 2014 that I was there. But there wasn't a lot digitized.
That's what I was thinking. We probably weren't using the internet very much here.
Yeah.
So,
Well,
yeah.
it was a small place. You're nice and big now.
Yeah, yeah. So, no, you never know where you're going to find that piece of information that you're looking for, right? And even, we don't know, I don't have record of absolutely everything in the files here that I can tell you offhand if we have information or not. So it's always exciting when someone's looking for something and go, oh, look, we have it here, you know?
Well, thank you so much. I couldn't have done it without you. And I just really encourage everybody to go see your charming town and take a walk along the Detroit River and just enjoy Canada.
Well, thank you, and congratulations on such a successful documentary.
Thank you. I'm officially passing the baton. There's a young man out in Oklahoma, Cole Rattan. He's a descendant of Wilmette. So that's one of Caldwell's friends. And
Okay.
he's a prolific researcher. And I'm passing the baton. I've been doing this
Are
for
you?
some years, but I
Okay.
wanted to document everything. So thank you, Meg.
No, thank you very much for talking with me and talking about the Marsh collection. Appreciate it.
Have a great day.
You too. Thank you.